I'll go ahead and introduce Candie. Candie volunteers for the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project in New Mexico, and she's been there since 2002, served as a petroglyph recording trainer and coordinator since 2008. She considers working on the Mesa to be a rare privilege, and the opportunity to work with Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project volunteers to be equally rewarding. So with that introduction, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Candie.
So this is a presentation that I do annually for our group in Mesa Prieta, and what it's demonstrating is our recordings teams will record for a full year, and I select the best images for that previous year. Now, this is for 2021, even though we're in 2023. I haven't done the 22 presentation yet. So these are the most outstanding of the images that we recorded on Mesa Prieta last year. Little comment about COVID. In 2020 and 2021, our entire project shut down. Nobody was working, except our archaeologist was working remotely. I was working remotely. And little by little, our recording team members contacted me and said, hey, we want to get to work. We work in small groups. We work outside. Can't we go into the field using recommended precautions? So by golly, they wore masks, they wore gloves, they used hand sanitizer on the equipment, and they went out and worked and did an amazing amount of work. Catherine Wells is our founder. You may have heard her name, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. She purchased the property that is now the Wells Petroglyph Preserve in 1991, and realized that there were thousands of images on that property, which was 188 acres. She contacted the Archaeological Society of New Mexico, and their Rock Art Field School was headed by Helen and Jay Crotty and Jerry and Jean Brody, who were the leaders in petroglyph recording during that time. They put together a field school, and they worked during the summer in July and August when it was the hottest, and documented 6,000 images. People who worked had very little training, and they got the work done. We realized afterwards, when we got started with our project, that the recording done during that time was not up to the current state-of-the-art techniques that we now use. So from 2004 to 09, we re-recorded all of that property and came up with a total of 11,000 petroglyphs. So with better techniques, better training, we increased the numbers on the Wells preserved by 5,000 images. In 2007, Catherine donated 181 acres of her property to the Archaeological Conservancy, and that's known as the Wells Petroglyph Preserve. And if any of you come to visit, that's the property that you'll be going to. Our archaeologist is Dr. Chester Lawash. He heads up our summer youth intern program, which I'll tell you a little bit about later in the program. Right now, he's on a partial leave of absence at New Mexico Highlands University teaching. So this photo was given to us by one of our recorders who just happened to be on a commercial flight and flew over the mesa. And you can see it's this long, elongated canoe-shaped mesa that we work on. The Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project itself was started formally in 2002. And since then, in the last 20 years, we have recorded more than 80,000 petroglyphs. We anticipate that there are well over 100,000 images on the mesa, and we have been identified as the largest petroglyph site in New Mexico. What I'm going to show you tonight are highlights of what we did in 2021, and this is just 6% of what we recorded. We recorded 970 individual loci or boulders, almost 2,300 individual petroglyphs, chose 67 outstanding panels, took 2,000 photos that have been photoshopped and prepared for our database. We completed recording on 80 acres on the Richard Cook family property and 30 acres on other private properties. This is a slide that I borrowed from Kurt Kempner that's quite interesting, especially for those of us who live in kind of a basin and range kind of topography. This shows how a mesa is created. And Mesa Prieta was formed 3 million years ago, and it was formed by a lava that ran down from a fissure up north near Colorado, ran down what now is the Rio Grande Valley. And little by little over the 3 million years, erosion tore away the soil around that lava bed so that it became the highest point in that area. And now it towers 1,000 feet above the valley floor around it. So the basalt has not moved, but the erosion, the tremendous erosion, is what caused it to be the highest form. We have known human usage that goes back over 7,500 years. The mesa itself is 12 miles long, 22,000 acres, and 36 square miles. So here's a picture, a Google Earth picture from the top in which we've put land ownership plots. This is the Rio Grande on the east side. This is US Highway 285 going up the west side. This on the brown on the top is the top of the mesa. We have focused our recording on the east side where most of the petroglyphs are. We've done a little bit on the west side, and we're currently working on a property down here near the tip. The green designation here was recorded by the Summer Youth Program working on BLM land. This whole north of the end of the mesa is BLM land. This big pink area is owned by the Richard Cook family, and it's 4,000 acres. The second biggest parcel is the Cook Cochran property, and it's 2,600 acres. Mr. Cook the family owns this parcel also. For comparison, this little bit of turquoise is the Wells Petroglyph Preserve, 181 acres with 11,000 petroglyphs on it. This piece of property we recorded, it was our first one in 2002. It's 225 acres. And we did not do a very good job. We missed a lot of things. And so the property owners have given us permission to go back in and work again. And so far, we've done probably 25% of the property, and we've increased the number of petroglyphs almost 150%. This little dark pink is a cluster of private properties that vary from 1 to 20 acres. We've recorded most of them, and they were very petroglyph dense. And then the red is the El Huique mine, which is an active sand and gravel mine that the Cook family still operates. So all of this is private land, with the exception of the BLM. There is only one road access, and that goes through private land. So you can't get up there unless you're willing to go up to the BLM and climb up the 1,000 feet to the top of the mesa. It's very well protected. This is a graphic of our recording. So again, to orient you, this is the top of the mesa that you just saw. And this is the east side where we're working. When we got permission to record this 4,000 acres of land on the Cook property, we thought, how the heck are we going to do this? There's just no way we can divide up areas, using stakes and GPSs and the like. It's just too difficult. So we had a GIS genius at the time, Courtney Kerr, and she helped us to develop this grid on the GIS map that we superimposed over the mesa. And then other people, my husband and Jeff Toomey, who was a volunteer, figured out how to upload this into our GPSs. So every team has a GPS with this grid on it. And if they're in provenience 87, they can increase the size of that provenience 87 on their GPSs and know when they're crossing the border into another provenience. And that's how we've been able to work up there. So this big piece of land that's 4,000 acres has 198 sections or proveniences. And then down here, this is a 2,600 acres, and it has just under 100 proveniences. Each one of these is approximately 20 acres, and it takes a team anywhere from maybe 5 to 7 outings to a year and a half to complete the recording of one of these proveniences, depending on the terrain and depending on how dense the petroglyph images are on the rocks. So the color key, the blue, the bright blue, these are completed. The yellow are surveyed. We have a survey team that works to determine the density and mostly the difficulty of the terrain. The green are underway. Teams are assigned to these and they're underway. And the pink we have not tackled yet. And these are our toughest areas because along here we have a basalt wall about 60 feet high that has cracks in it that if you're a good climber, you can get down. And then down here, it's protected by this piece of property that's private. So it's hard to get up there. This one, the only road that goes up on the mesa is here. And then the roads are very, very poor. Getting down here takes about an hour and a half of driving from where you leave the road at the base of the mesa, drive up that road, and then come all the way down here. It's about an hour and a half driving, and then you climb down and start working. So these are our most difficult challenges, but we will get to them. We're working with adult volunteers. They are the heart of the recording program. Before COVID, we had 40 volunteers, and now attrition has taken us down to 20, but I think we've got some of the best volunteers that you can imagine. They're divided into 7 teams. 3 of the teams are working on the Cook family property, and 4 others are working on separate private parcels. The volunteers, and you can see here some of them at work and some of the terrain that we're working in, they have to apply there's an application online and they have to apply. That is vetted by our archaeologists to determine whether we want to go ahead and train that applicant. Once they are approved, there is an online training course of 5 YouTube classes for training. And then once they have completed those, they pass a little test. And then they go into the field and receive 4 days of field training with a mentor before they are assigned to a team. We commit a lot of time to training our volunteers, and it has really paid off. We ask them to commit to record 1 day a month for a minimum of a year. And most of the teams will group their recording dates, like right now, at least before it got real cold. Most of our teams are working weekly or every other week and not working through the summer because it gets so hot up there with those black rocks. And several of our volunteers have been with the project for 19 or more years, which is amazing. This work would not be possible without our recording and survey volunteers. They are not reimbursed in any way for mileage, for gasoline, for their boots that they wear out. We have liability insurance, but we reimburse them in any way. The Summer Youth Intern Program also has been impacted by COVID. We used to have the program for 12 to 14 kids. Youth aged 13 to 18 would apply online. They have to write an essay for their application to be accepted into the program. They are trained to record petroglyphs and other archaeological features in the same manner as the adult recording teams. And then they worked on the Cook property for 2 weeks every June, overseen by the project archaeologist and adult volunteers. The program is STEM-based, and I think I just heard the term STEAM-based. They add A for art in that, and I think definitely we can apply that term to what we do because these kids are drawing the images that they're seeing. They acquire skills that contribute to employment and advanced education, and they get dual credit, college credit. So moving on to the work that we do, I just want to go through the cultural time periods we recognize on Mesa Prieta. The Paleo-Indian time period, we don't know what these images look like, and we are relying on lithics to verify that the Paleo-Indians did use this area at one time. And that time period is from 12,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE. The Archaic time period is very significant on the Mesa, from 7500 BCE to 600 BCE, and then late developmental, which I'll spend a little bit of time talking about. Ancestral Pueblo is the most, provides the most dense images on the Mesa. It started around 1100 CE when the people came down from the Four Corners region and changed its cultural status when the Spanish arrived in 1598. The historic or post-contact time period started then at 1598 and runs roughly to 1972. I'm not sure why we cut it off there, probably 50 years. And then we identify a Euro-American period, which is about 1920 to the present, and I'll talk about all of these periods. So the evidence of Paleo-Indian culture on Mesa Prieta refers to the late Pleistocene and early Holocene occupations of North America and encompasses the Clovis and Folsom cultures. The Clovis points, and I know that you all know this, date from about 14,000 to 12,000 calendar years ago. The Clovis fluted points are named after the city of Clovis, where examples were found in 1929. The Folsom complex dates to about 9,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE, and the cultural time periods identified through artifacts that are typically medium to large lanceolate points. Now we're all doing reading about the findings that are coming to the attention of the interested people in Central and South America. And I've not even considered that for our area. We're still staying with these dates. So what we found on Mesa Prieta so far are three possible Paleo-Indian lithics that have been found on the Mesa. However, we do not know if they are indigenous. We do not know that it was Paleo people who brought them here, or if they were found someplace else in New Mexico and picked up and brought here by another group. We don't know, and we have no way of knowing. Were they found elsewhere and brought to the Mesa for intended reuse? We don't know. They're beautiful points, and yes, people would pick them up and repurpose them. The first one we found very early on in about 2009, and we recognized that this point was significant, although our group could not really identify what it was. So we enlisted the help of Dr. Bruce Huckle, who's a paleoarchaeologist, a lithics specialist at the University of New Mexico, and he has been very, very generous in helping us to identify these lithics. So he indicated this is a quartzite lithic, broken in manufacture. It's a preform for a point or a knife. The significant thing about it is you can see that there are these transverse diagonal, they're parallel diagonal pressure flaking that go all the way, almost all the way across the point on both sides. And that is specific for these types of points. Later points are not made this way. He felt that this, first of all, he needed a point base for conclusive diagnosis, and that's true for all of these points. But he felt very strongly that this was an archaic or a paleo point. But he said you don't see large points like this in the archaic or in the Puebloan biface points. So he was pretty sure that this would represent that earlier time period. This point was identified as a Folsom point. In 1999, the Cook family enlisted a survey by an archaeologist, T.G. Futch, down in the El Huique mine. And Mr. Futch found 14 sites down there that he found were significant, and one of them was a Folsom site. This is the best picture we have of it. Mr. Cook gave Mr. Futch permission to keep any artifacts that he found, and Mr. Futch passed on 5-6 years ago. We have contacted his wife, and she no longer possesses the artifacts. So there is no way that we could retrieve this to prove or to demonstrate that it actually was, found down there. But we believe he's a credible archaeologist, and we believe what he found. This one was found recently, about 5 years ago, by a recorder, and he picked it up because it was a pretty stone. He had no idea what he had found. We took this down to Dr. Huckle also, And by now he was kind of chuckling when he would see me coming, but he always is very helpful in advising us. He said it's likely Pedernal chert from the inclusions that are in this. It's likely was broken during field use. And if you can see at the tip, there are fracture marks. They're kind of curved fracture marks that come back. And this would have occurred when the point had hit either a bone or a stone, that this would break in that manner. He indicated that it has, again, that selective diagonal pressure flaking, the parallel oblique pressure flaking going across the front and the back. The thickness and the width is greater than archaic points. It's much more robust. And then when he looked at this ridge here, this little fracture, this is where the break of the point is, and there's this little ridge here, a little shelf. And he said, I think this is the top of where the flute would have come from, the fluted point on this artifact. And he felt that the flute would have come up to there and ended abruptly at that ridge. And he said, I'm fairly certain that this is a Clovis point, but I won't bet my paycheck on it. So, but we were very happy with his examination of it, and felt, if this is so, this point is 10,000 to 13,000 years old. It's a very significant find. As I said before, we have no idea what Paleo-Indian rock images are. We have on one of our tours, this cupule exists, and another mentor, Dr. Richard Ford, who works with the project, said, I think this is probably the oldest cupule I've seen on the Mesa. He thinks it's older than archaic, that it possibly is paleo. It's so old and deep, it's eroded at the bottom, it's no longer smooth, but it's very significant. This is a natural hole that has been worked by humans. And then if you can see, there's scratch marks radiating out from that hole. These scratch marks penetrated the patina, and they have been repatinated. They're extremely old. We have no way of knowing how old, when they were made, why they were made, but they're among the oldest things that we found in the inscribing on basalt on the Mesa. Here's a scratched grid, the same thing. It penetrated the patina and has totally repatinated. So we're just guessing, could this be representative of that time period? But we don't know. Moving on to the archaic culture period. I'll go over this quickly. You should be able to read it. This time period extends from 7500 BCE to 600 CE, and represents about 5% of the images we find. But I really question that number because they are so hard to see. I think we were missing a lot of them. The archaic people were hunters and gatherers who gathered in mobile bands and moved through the area looking for wild plants and hunting game animals. Their images are very deeply pecked, heavily or totally repatinated and difficult to see, and they're called non-figurative because they don't represent anything of today's world. They're often placed on the top of boulders or on the north side. The images include abstract or geometric images like one-pole ladders, tridents, asterisks, curvilinear meanders, joined diamonds or triangles, and other geometric images. Many are extremely abstract and perhaps were made by a person in a shaman in a dreamlike ceremony or hallucinogenic trance. Later archaic images in the later period include human footprints, handprints, and animal tracks. They represent the oldest images recognized as present on the Mesa. So here are some examples. This is called a one-poled ladder. It's a geometric image. And the image, this image has quite a bit of black lichen in it also. They're hard to see. This one's actually fairly obvious, but they're hard to see. These, this one down here is a spiral going from the center out to the left. And it's almost totally repatinated. This in the lower right-hand corner, you can barely see. And this is one of the challenges, is these are so old that it really takes a trained eye to pick these out from the dark, with the dark patina from the very dark background of the rock. The one in the upper right is very deeply pecked, and for that reason, we're able to see that there is a concentric circle there. This photo was taken early in the morning or later in the afternoon when the sun was casting a shadow across the depth of that relief pecking, so that this one was easier to pick out. But it's really, really hard to train new recorders how to pick these things out, how to trust their eye to look at something aberrant on the rock and go examine it. These are late archaic images. This upper left one is a human footprint, beautifully made on a rather small boulder. And the repatination has not, it's heavy, but it's not returned to the original color of the basalt. On the lower left one, there's a diagram there showing that there's actually 7 human footprints buried in there. And again, it takes a trained eye, a suspicious eye, to go over and look carefully in that to be able to pick out what's on that rock. The upper right, these are a little bit brighter. There's 3 human footprints on this one. And then in the lower right, it varies. There's some little bit lighter human footprints. There's a nice zigzag line. But because they're a little bit lighter, we suspect that they're in the late archaic period. And also the iconography of tracks tells us that they're in the later period. This was an interesting find. We were recording an agricultural site and with alignments, rock alignments, of which there are many on the mesa. And I looked at this boulder, this very small boulder that's portable, and realized that 3 sides of the boulder had an archaic curvilinear meander carved all the way around it. And it's all in deeply pecked, it's all in relief, and it's all just about totally repatinated. It's quite a treasure. It's in place right there where that picture is. We don't collect unless the property owner has given us permission to collect, and then it would only be if it was a suspected paleo artifact. This boulder has, thank goodness to Allison's drawing here, we have 2 very deeply pecked human footprints, one over here, and I don't know if you could pick out those toes. They're almost like cupules, they're so deeply pecked. So there's 2 human footprints. There's a rake right here with tines. There's another kind of a curved rake down here. There's a cross over here and 2 cupules over here. And all of them are very heavily repatinated, very, very hard to see. We were lucky to get this picture. We intentionally went up early in the morning so that the east sun would be shining across the face of this image, so that we could get a good picture of it. Moving on, so working with Catherine for the 20 years that I have, we always had a puzzle that we knew the archaic people were pretty much gone by 600 CE, and we knew that the ancestral Pueblo people had arrived around 1100 CE, but was anybody using the mesa in the interim? And if they were, what indications, what did they leave that would help us identify them? And so we had the opportunity of identifying what became a late developmental site, which dates from about 900 CE to 1100 CE, which is equivalent to Pueblo II, if you're studying the time periods of archaeology. And it fit into that void of 500 years, at least a little bit. We knew that there had been a late developmental site found in the El Huique mine survey, but we went down to resurvey it, and most of it had been destroyed. We found a few broken monos, a few lithics, an ash stain, and that was all. If we didn't know that that's what it was, we would not been able to find that it was a late developmental site. So we've been looking, being cognitive of this void and what could be left in the way of evidence on the mesa that would help us to understand that. So we were given permission to record a property far north on the mesa, down on the base on the east side. And it was about 40 acres into 2 parcels. And we finished the 1 parcel, and we found a lot of evidence of habitation sites, but it was a plowed field. And so everything that we found had been displaced, and we couldn't put together any kind of a picture. The second parcel had this very large boulder on it. It's 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, sitting up on a hill. And it had intrigued us the whole time we were working down below. When we got up to the boulder, we discovered that there were heavily repatinated footprints, elk tracks, handprints, canine prints, and underneath were fully repatinated prints, indicating that this boulder had had a usage time period of hundreds, if not thousands of years. We recorded the boulder. We ended up getting 141 elements, individual petroglyphs off the boulder, which is more than any boulder that we've done so far on the mesa. And we ended up dividing it into 12 subsections, and each one of those was treated as a locus with photography, drawing, etc. So we finished that boulder and then started looking around the site and noticed that next to the boulder, in the vicinity of the boulder, were 3 low ash-stained mounds. None of us on this team are archaeologists, but we're very curious about this. Scattered on around the area, here's another late archaic boulder with footprints on it. Here is a broken matati with a very, very deep usage pattern. Here's a slab matati that had broken, and then at a later date, ancestral Pueblo Indians had placed a anthropomorph on it. So what gives? We found a number of monos in addition to this matati. We found some archaic points, and we found some very crude pottery. It was an enigma, and it was something that I wasn't going to let go. So I collected about a dozen pieces of the pottery and took them to some of the people who are our resources for an explanation. So the main person I contacted was Dean Wilson from the Office of Archaeological Studies. And Dean, and this may be of use to you because I know you see pottery everywhere you go. Dean developed the Southwest Ceramic Typology Project website that features thousands of examples of ceramics found in the Southwest that are organized in a meaningful and accessible manner. So if you were on a site and you found something like this, you could go to the website and probably successfully type it as to what its cultural background is and its time period. Anyway, Dean spent a lot of time with me and my husband, and he went through and he typed all of these ceramics that I presented to him and indicated that they define a late developmental site that would exist from 900 to 1100 CE or a Pueblo period time. He indicated that very likely that all of these 4 and the one in the lower right were probably indigenous to the site. And the little one up in the right-hand corner is tradeware, that it likely came with someone from the east of the Rio Puerco in the Colorado Plateau area and probably was brought to the site. But it was just so exciting to have this information to add to the legacy of the Mesa and the usage of the Mesa. So moving on to the next period is the ancestral Pueblo cultural period. And this represents probably 70% of all of the images that we record. The time period is 1100 until when the Spanish came in 1598. The people came from the Four Corners area. They're ancestors of the Tewa-speaking people who live here today. For those of you who don't know, we have active pueblos. There's one at the base of the mesa that I'll talk about a little bit. People in the region began to cultivate some of the plants needed for food and personal medicinal use, making them more stationary rather than hunter-gatherers. The images they made were largely iconic or figurative. They are images that we could identify in today's world. They include mythological images such as 1 and 2 horned serpents, water beings called avanyus, spirals, circles, discs, concentric circles, anthropomorphic figures, ceremonial objects, shields, stars, flute players, animals, birds, dancers, ceremonial figures, etc. They're phenomenal. So starting out with the 2 horned serpents, which are called avanyu. The avanyu is a water sign for all native people, all ancestral people. It's made down into Mexico. There are terms for it there in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, etc. The iconography has a typology that's similar, that they have 2 horns, they have a head, and they have a serpentine body. This one over here is just exquisitely made. You can see the fineness of the pecking and the outline of that image, and he actually has a little human face. He hangs right over the Rio Grande. This is typical of how the Mesa is to work on, with very steep slopes, with basalt boulders that have fallen from the basalt cap and fallen down the slope. It's tough country to work in. We find 1-horned serpents. Some people wonder if these might be a 2-horned serpent in profile. We don't know, but we find about one one-horned serpent for every 20 2-horned serpents on the Mesa. Anthropomorphs are fairly frequent. This one is lying down on a small stone. I don't know that it represents death, because he's horizontal rather than vertically inclined. The hands are shown, the feet are shown. His torso is square. This one down here has some kind of decoration on his torso, perhaps painting on his chest or on a garment. And he has a very long neck and then a very rounded head. And as we always count the digits on the hands and the feet. This one over on the right has some kind of a ceremonial headdress that we can't make out on this image. He's holding some kind of a staff or a sword in this hand, and this hand there appears to be nothing. The gender is depicted on these images. We have a lot of flute players on the Wells Preserve. If you go for a tour there, you'll see that you'll be introduced to animal flute players, which are unique for petroglyphs in the United States. This one is rather crudely made, but he's a figure holding a flute, playing a flute. He has a humpback. This other one is more typical. He's very stooped over, has probably a feather headdress, has a flute, and he has that big humpback. We have a lot of flute player images, but this is all that we found in 2021. Moving on to tracks and footprints, I showed you a lot of tracks and footprints in the late Archaic period. These are brighter, these are later, and probably just 1,000 years old. This one has 2 human footprints, and then other items on this boulder, and then some late applications of initials. This one, I'm not sure if it's a footprint or not. If it's a bear track, it has too many toes, but it's just exquisitely made and repatinated. A very nice human footprint. And then we have lots and lots of bird tracks. And I've been doing some research on bird tracks that have 3 toes and 4 toes. As you know, the raptors have a hallux, which would give them a 4th toe for gripping game. This we think is either turkey or crane tracks. The interesting things about these is that they're found very often along trails. And when we see them, we start looking around to see if there are trails that these are markers for. And very often, yes, we can find a trail. This panel is an ancestral Pueblo panel with a very complex one. It has concentric circles at the top. Whenever we see this symbol, we consider, is this a solar marker? And these are way back in the backcountry. So we take a direction. We take this one, we got the degrees facing the direction it was facing. but we have not done studies on this to determine whether it is a solar marker. This one has 4 abanus, 4 two-horned serpents, and then went back here behind the drawing, a circle. It has a disc that's tailed, and then a number of other small things. This is a large boulder sitting on the top of a ridge, and it is obvious from a far distance. This boulder is at the north end of the mesa on private property. It has this, I don't know if you can see our recorder over here on the right, but Susan is standing there. This shield measures almost 1 meter in diameter. You can see how exquisitely it's pecked and made, and it reflects paintings of or iconography of the maker. It has some nucleated circles, several of them. This might be a plant form, and then there are other small things in here. The shields are an actual artifact. Also, they're generally made of wood and covered with leather. They're a Plains Indian implement, and we have quite a few Plains Indians features that are reflected in the petroglyphs. The symbols painting on there might be clan figures. We don't know what they represent, but they're very unique. Also on this boulder is a nice water bird, and then lots of little footprints around here. A feature that we discovered recently, and we found enough of these that we went to the Archaeological Society of New Mexico Rock Art Council that oversees all of the recording in New Mexico to make sure that what we're doing is consistent. We use the same categorization sheets, the same forms, and so it's interchangeable as far as consistency. But we were finding rocks with this very specific pecking. This beautiful panel is a shield with 2 diagrams on it, 2 concentric circles, and then over to the side, a perfectly made star with a natural hole that's been worked. Down here, there's no image here, just this random or precise pecking, the same here. And so we wanted to call this ritual pecking because we felt it's very intentional. We have a lot of miscellaneous pecking that's just very random, but this seems very intentional when it's placed on these nice images. This in the upper right is a boulder that has had the patina totally pounded off the top. There's images in there. I think there's footprints under there, but the patina is totally pounded off. And often we find these with a worked natural hole or a cupule. And Dr. Ford, when we presented these to him, he said, I think these are shrines. I think they're areas that Native people have returned to again and again. And he felt that they were ceremonial and very important to the people. And so we presented these 2 types of images to the Rock Art Council and petitioned for them to be added to our category sheets, and they were. So we're very pleased that we don't find them very often, but we're very pleased that we can give them proper annotation. This gorgeous spiral is again on private property, of course, and it comes out going to the right. We always note if they're going to the right or to the left, and we also count the number of revolutions it makes. It has the possibly sun indication spires or feathers. We don't know. We weren't there, and we don't try to assume that we know what they are. But it's a beautifully made spiral. It's not that big, as you can see here. Our photo board is 30 centimeters, so this is probably 40 centimeters. And then at a later time, an application of initials was added to the boulder. But it's just a stunning image. We see animals. The upper left one is a very beautifully made mammal, a quadruped. We can't tell if this is a ungulate, a canine, a lion. We're pretty sure it's not a lion because our lions are very specifically made. So we just called it an unidentified mammal. We have a category for that. And then down here, this is very likely a turtle. So we do see a lot of animals. In that the east side of the mesa is very close to the river, we see a number of aquatic animals and birds in the rock images. And speaking of, our team found this beautifully, exquisitely made bird low on the mesa. It was actually adjacent to the mine. We identified it as an egress. It has a very slender, long beak, and on the side of the rock, there's actually what might be a fish in his beak. Very long, slender neck, body, delicate tail feathers, knobby knees and feet. It's just an exquisite image. And I'm kind of wondering if this isn't more of a post-contact image. It's quite bright, and it's so elegantly made. I'm wondering if it was made at a later period, but we have no way of knowing. Then going to the post-contact period, which started when the Spanish arrived at the south end of the mesa in 1598. Don Juan Oñate came with 200 men and hundreds of quadrupeds in the way of horses, cows, mules, sheep. They arrived at the base of the mesa to the area to the pueblo that's called Oke which is right at the tip of the mesa. It's still an active pueblo today. And Oñate started the first Spanish community in New Mexico at that point, right at the base of the mesa. They were welcomed. That soon changed because the Spanish were known for actually making slaves of the Indians and requiring them to make their large churches and work for the Spanish. The Tewa people, the Oke people, started making images on the mesa representing what they saw in this new culture. And that would include horses, donkeys, cattle, equestrian figures, cowboys, oxen, carts, guns, crosses, churches, and then later on names, dates, and initials. And then we're pretty certain that also the Spanish people started making images, particularly later on when the mesa became used for sheep herding and cattle herding. So the images of this time period are made both by the Tewa and the Spanish. We can guess which is which, but we have no way of knowing because we weren't there. These are the only time-specific images on the mesa that we can identify. So here are some. Here's a very crude horse. I think everybody would agree that that's not a cow, that's not a deer or an elk. This one is an equestrian figure with a horse, with a figure on the horse with some kind of headdress and some implements in his hand. Some of them actually will have a bridle and show the reins going up to the rider. Names and dates started to appear later in this period, Nick Lovato. And then this one, Año 1859, is the oldest date we have found so far on the mesa. And we take these to be accurate. One of the most frequent iconography made during this time period are Christian crosses. In 2013, we had an accurate count of over 3,000 crosses in the items that we had recorded. And now, almost 10 years later, there is more likely probably 5,000 crosses that we have recorded. We also have equilateral crosses that are also identified in all time periods, and they're often thought of as star forms. Most of the Christian crosses are Latin crosses. However, we have identified more than 25 styles of European crosses on those that have been recorded. In 2013, our then project director and archaeologist, Janet McKinsey, presented a program at the International Federation of Rock Art Organizations in Albuquerque entitled Cross Connections, Religious Iconography of the Historic Period, Mesa Prieta and Area. And she presented a representation of over 3,000 crosses having been recorded, and then introduced that we had identified more than 25 styles of European crosses. It's a very significant paper. So here's an example of a large boulder on, of course, private land. These crosses appear to have made all at the same time. But what's interesting is that you can see the ground level down here, and we don't know if the ground level backfilled and rose, or if the maker of all these crosses was lying here on the ground making these crosses. What was his message, if so? But I think there's 23 of them there, and they're deeply pegged. There was a lot of effort to place these crosses at this very low position on the rock. We also see what we think are churches. You can see that these are quite a bit brighter than what I've been showing you earlier. These are 200 and 300 years old, but they're still quite bright. So churches, the drawing of this one, this is either an altar cross or a church cross, again, very bright. This beautiful, beautiful, iconic cross. It's not well filled in, but see how carefully it's made. We're wondering if this could be a chalice. And then another cross over here is St. John's cross over here. And then more examples of crosses. This is a pommet cross. It's kind of in a little cradle, beautifully made. And then these were found on kind of a post-contact shrine that I'll show you some more of. Notice the 2 natural holes that have been worked. These are things that we make note of in our recording. So the year after about 1920, we wanted to name this period because we would see a lot of petroglyphs that most people call graffiti, and we didn't want to call them graffiti because they're intentionally made. We wanted to give them their own time period, so we called this the American time period, and it's in the Euro-American cultural time period. Many are made with metal tools. Some copy older Native American petroglyphs and add creative modifications. And we have a unique set that were made in the late 30s. At that time, the Work Progress Administration had a crew working on what was going to become the Wells Petroglyph Preserve, the WPA, and they left their marks on the boulders. And these images can be assumed to be time specific when dates are included. So here are some of these. And again, this looks like it's 19-something-3. I'm not sure what that is, with ALF, and it's superimposed over an older glyph. It's very bright. The star form is probably made in that time period. These are about 100 years old. And then this one down here is very nicely made. Lewis star, but very likely 100 years old or less. These are the WPA glyphs, a couple of them, made in 1938. There was a man whose initials were JVJ, and he carved on maybe a dozen rocks in the area. They're all small rocks, and he would carve his initials, he would carve the date, and he would carve WPA. And we're wondering how much work this man actually did, because he was quite busy carving on the rocks. But they're an iconography on the Wells Preserve that's very, very unique. Alejandro, another nicely made name. In addition to the petroglyphs, we record cultural landscape features, and these include agricultural terraces, dams, gravel mulch fields, rock walls, structures, shelters, reservoirs. We have found several reservoirs that the actual vegetation growth behind the reservoir is different from what is found elsewhere on the mesa. Thousands of ceramics and lithics, and trails of all time periods. The trails are still used today by the local people and often to visit the images of stories long ago told. We find corrals, fences, lambing pens made of stone high on the mesa that reflect economic activities of sheep herding and cattle grazing that continue from pre-Pueblo Revolt, 1680, until the 1960s. At one time, they estimated there were 7,000 sheep on the mesa, and the evidence of erosion indicates the overgrazing that occurred that the mesa is still trying to recover from. We find horseshoes worn out by horses and mules of herders and travelers. They're very common. And we find animal bones with signs of butchering and evidence of axe and saw cut wood harvesting We record all of this. It goes in our database. We find cupules, find thousands of cupules. This in the lower left, you can see how bright these are. And these are part of the post-contact shrine I spoke of. These are probably 200 to 300, maybe fewer than that, years old. But there's these very, very deep, very bright cupules. And then nearby are many of the cross images that have fairly similar repatination. The image on the right is the boulder that right now it's right over a road. But what used to be there is a meandering Rio Grande that these would have been fairly close to that floodplain. You can see on the upper part that ceremonial pounding has occurred here so that the patina has been impacted. And then these 7, 8, 9 very deep, very heavily repatinated cupules were placed. And then there's others all across the boulder. So these, we have no way of knowing how old they are, but would estimate that they're 2,000, 3,000 years old. They're just exquisite. We can't rely on repatination for dating. It's a good indicator, but we have found ancestral Pueblo images that the iconography matches the ancestral time period, ancestral Pueblo time period, but they're totally repatinated. So we can't rely on that as a given, but it's a very consistent observation in these archaic images. We find a lot of hand tools, stone hand tools. This is a mono. This is the same piece. And if you look closely, you can see that a bird track has been carved on there. We don't know if it was carved at the time that this was in use or at a later time, but it's there. This is, you can see how very shiny this is. It was very heavily used. It's also a pounding stone. Very, very beautiful piece of stone. It's kind of a green stone. It's not a typical cobble. This cobble is a two-handed mono. We found this in the field and that had been plowed and plowed and plowed, and very likely it was run over by the plow. But fortunately, the two pieces were close together. And then in the same area, we found these things. These hand tools were found in an area about 6 by 8 meters. They were scattered about because they were in a floodplain. And I believe that they had been previously collected. And then I came along and collected them again and recorded them. There were 14 of them. And then we redistributed it to the original spot that we found them. All of them have crude notching on the side. They had a little bit of pounding marks on the tips. And I was thinking, okay, they're next to the floodplain, they're next to an agricultural field. Are they hoes? And they just didn't seem to be hoes, especially when I did some research on them. And then one of our members of our organization thought, these are right down on property just below the Rio Grande Gorge, where the Utes and the Apaches would cause some havoc. And our volunteer raised the theory, could these be expedient tools of war? Are these weapons? Had no notching on them, but they very well could have been lashed to a stout stick and used as tools either of defense or of war. And the fact that they were collected together supported that if these people were to be attacked, they would have their weapons handy to be used. So it's curious. We don't know for sure what they are, but they're very, very curious. They're back in their original spots and they're on private lands, so they're safe. So they're there for researchers to address. We find metates. This is the one that was found on the late developmental site, and you can see that this had a lot of use. This slab metate was near that site also. So we find these. Generally, we find slab metates. We very rarely find one that's been this well used, simply because we don't have habitation sites on the mesa. This lithic was found and recorded. It's a highly polished stone, and we think it was ceremonial. And then we find a lot of projectile points. These are made of obsidian. We take care to determine where the obsidian comes from. There's 6 or 7 quarries on the Jemez Mountains to the west of us. And we try to type these obsidian points to determine what quarry they came from and then what time period they are. Again, these are left in the field. Thousands of ceramics are found. Most of them are Tewa, 1100 to about 1600 AD. They're biscuit A, biscuit B. Most of them are painted. We find other ceramics also, Penicero, which are later, and then later moving into the Spanish development. These are left in the field, but we try to record. We photograph both sides. We draw several of them. We try, when we have a rim piece, especially one that has a nice bend to it, we try to document that. We give the curvature and the width of the ceramic. And so this material will be on our website for researchers to carry forth with. The structures we find are many walls, and I can imagine that the people, whether they were the ancestral people or if they were the sheep herders, would want shelter from the incessant wind that's up there. And so we find these structures and we define how they look as far as like this one, the rocks have been turned, so the lighter patina is on top, the darker patina is down below. We look for consistency in the patina and mark that on our recording sheets. And also, if there is lichen, we note if the lichen is consistent on one side, like on the north side, this wall appears to have very consistent lichen that has grown on the north side of that wall, and these rocks have not been moved for a very, very long time. We find lambing pens up there, shelters for the sheep. This is an eagle trap. We find those on the high ridges. This hole is big enough to accommodate a human who can crouch down in there and tether a live something, a rabbit or something, to this rock. And then when the eagle comes down to retrieve the rabbit, the man in the hole reaches up and captures the eagle. They are kept alive. They're used for their feathers. They're not sacrificed. We find lots and lots in the way of grid gardens, check dams, gravel mulch fields, and reservoirs. It's a very, very rich cultural usage up there. As I mentioned, we record axe cut trees. Everyone's history is on the mesa. Whether these were used for fence posts or for wood burning fires, we don't know. We have found a few corn cobs. These were found in one of the agricultural areas, the plowed field, and we were very excited that these might be ancestral corn cobs, but we took them to our mentor, Dr. Ford, and he is an expert on corn and on maize, and he informed us that these were probably late 19 or early 1900 corn cobs grown for livestock forage. They're very tiny, and they only had like 7 rows going around, and we were very excited when we found them, but he said, no, they're not quite that old. And trails. There are trails all over the mesa, and we record them when they're encountered. This one is a very obvious one, but very often we'll be walking along, and all of a sudden we realize that we're not walking in all this cobble, but we're walking in a cleared area. And if we look around, we'll find that we're on a segment of trail. There are trails that are archaic. They're marked by archaic images and archaic lithics. And those continue to be used because we'll continue to find later cultural time period artifacts along them. Then when the livestock were on the mesa, livestock trails were constructed, and they're beautiful. They're serpentine trails with high walls that go up the steep slopes where the cattle or sheep will be forced to stay in that channel to get to where they're supposed to go. We record these trails by hand, but very soon they all will be recorded using the Venza maps, which will make a very more sophisticated annotation, and then we'll have a shape file on our database that will show where these trails are. They're fascinating because they're like a network all over the mesa. I have this slide in here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I wanted to show you that when we find an artifact that we leave in the field, how well we record these. This one was found by two archaeologists working on the west side of the mesa. It's a tiny little base of a point, and they typed it using references. We have a list of references that we use, and they typed it as a pedernal chert point dating to the late Archaic, probably 2500 BC to 700 BCE. And then it's typed as a San Rafael side-notched Moquino concave base. So the point is in the field, but we have this tremendous professional description of it for our researchers to access. So I wanted to acknowledge our recorders that were working in 2021 and also our surveyors. I wanted to thank you. And then this is my last slide, and I want to read this. I invited the landowners to come to my presentation when I gave it in New Mexico, and one responded and said, "Thank you and your teams for all the hard work that has gone into the success known as the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project. Your collective work is most appreciated by our family. Happy holidays to you, your family, and your other family, your teammates in Mesa Prieta." This is our website, Mesa Prieta Petroglyphs.org. And this is my contact information. If any of you want to contact me, that'd be perfectly fine. So these photos show a little bit about our terrain. And there's actually two recorders up here on top of that mass. Some of the terrain is really nice to walk across. Sometimes we find rattlesnakes and they don't know who we are. And so we leave them alone and they leave us alone. Allison will record every day of the week if she can. This is my partner Janet and I recording right on that nice steep slope. Kate Paul carries a little chair so he's comfortable. And on around we find all kinds of wonderful things. This was a solar marker panel down deep in this ravine that the team went down to record, and one of the team members stayed up and took a picture of them. And this is our surveying team. We have mountain lions on the mesa. We see their tracks. We have seen them, and usually they are leaving fast. They don't bother us. So, but it's a wonderful place to work and wonderful people to work with. So that concludes my talk. And do we have time for questions, Richard?
We should have. You'll go ahead and stop sharing your screen.
Got it?
Candie, this is Dave Salge. I do. I'm sorry, Richard. Go ahead.
No,
I'm just
watching. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, Candie, this is Dave Salge. I really appreciate this. This is well done. I'm a little curious about your term provenience on all of your kind of your tags and things. Is that because not only are you recording the image, but you're also determining origin and source and location of the image? Is that why you're using that term in this case?
Okay, that's a very good question, Dave. We use the term provenience to mean a designated area that archaeological recording is worked in. And our proveniences are 20 acres. If you go back to that map I showed at the beginning that showed the grid going across the east side of the mesa, our provenience is 20 acres. And so when you look at our photo board, it says, it'll say Mesa Prieta, and then it'll say the project number, and that is project number is assigned to each landowner. And then the provenience on that landowner, like the Cook family, is project number 15 or 14. And then the proveniences on the project number 15, there's 199 proveniences. So that says provenience with that, whichever number it is, and then the photo number within that provenience.
Okay.
So
all right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a way of keeping track. Every photo that goes into our database is unique. It has a unique tag on it, and it has all that information, plus our LA number and our NIMCRIS number that we get from the from ARMS in Santa Fe. So it's very sophisticated the way we have them categorized. Good question.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty typical of, I guess, of an archaeological excavation and things. So I just am not used to seeing it as often as you've presented it here. So thank you for that explanation. Again, great presentation. I really appreciated it.
Thank you. I hope that you can come and visit the Wills Preserve.
Yeah, we're gonna have to make a trip over there.
Yeah, I might say a little bit about that. The only place people can visit on the Mesa is on the Wills Petroglyph Preserve. That's the only place that's open for visits. And to make a reservation for a docent-led tour, we don't have any self-guided tours. Docent-led tour, you can go to our website and make those reservations online.
Question.
Yeah.
What's the east part behind BCE, ADE? What's the E?
Era,
Era.
common era.
Common era, yeah.
Yeah, before
BC,
For common era.
Mhm.
Darlene, did you have a question?
Yes. Candie, I have like 3 different questions to ask you, if that's okay.
Is that Darlene Brinkerhoff?
Yes.
Hi, Darlene. I'm good.
Oh,
It's good to see you.
mute that person. Don't let her talk. Don't let her talk.
One of my questions is, do you guys have like a separate file that you're keeping your Spanish names and your Spanish glyphs, like in a separate file in case somebody wants to use that data for their research?
Good question. The way our database is set up is that a researcher could go in there and query things like, we'll say, equestrian, because that would be a Spanish area image. So we don't have them separated out, but the researcher can use certain terms like Christian crosses and query things in that manner. We don't separate them out by cultural time periods.
In in the northeastern corner here of Arizona, I'm interested in seeing a lot of historical Spanish names, especially if they have dates with them, because we've been at some areas, and of course, there's some places too that, like up by Canyon de Chelly and Chaco, that have the historical army glyphs. But in this area too, we can, look them up in the records, in the genealogy records, if we have dates and areas.
That would be fantastic. We are not that sophisticated. However, the information, we have a dendroglyph project in the Via Caldera near us, in which sheep herding was conducted, and they are recording thousands of dendroglyphs, and that information is good to take for genealogical studies. But we have very few first and last names and dates that are recorded. They're not a lot. It wasn't initials are more popular, I think, than full names, mostly because the early people didn't know how to write. The early Spanish people didn't know how to write. So that's not really offered on the Mesa, but the Dendroglyph project would probably be similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know in Chaco Canyon, and they must have been, a lot of those were educated, because they have beautiful script writings, Spanish script writings that have the dates on them. Have you seen those?
Aren't they? And if you've been to El Morro, that's some of the finest Spanish writing that you'll find. We're not that sophisticated.
Okay, one of my other questions was, were you guys able to get any carbon-14 or archaeomag dates from any burned areas?
Good thought. We do not do excavation. That's not our purpose. And there are not sites on the Mesa. We have these walls, but we don't have habitation sites. Anything that would have been there would have been down at the base of the Mesa and has been probably destroyed by hundreds of years of farming. So we don't have that opportunity. Even when Mr. Futch was working in the Ohuike mine, looking at some of those sites, he did not take any samples for magnadating, archaeomagno dating, or carbon 14. We don't have that kind of residue. Good question.
Now, were they mainly Pueblo builders there with the stones, or is there a lot of pit house dwellers there as well?
We've only found a couple of pit houses, and I'm pretty sure they're pit houses. We're not excavating anything though, so we can't say.
And let's see. One last question. Have you guys seen any pictographs in your area?
One. We have a nucleated circle near the top of the mesa, and it's close to what was a lambing camp. And it's been authenticated by several archaeologists, and that we're quite certain it's a pictograph. It's red. One. Thank you, Darlene.
Well, that was a very wonderful presentation. And I want to thank everybody that has joined us on Zoom and those that are here in person. This is something that I'm going to try to do from now on, is do a in-person and Zoom meeting combination.
Thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you all.
Well, I want to thank you again, Candie, for giving us this wonderful presentation. And if nobody has anything else, I'll go ahead and bring this meeting to an end.
Okay. Well, good night, all, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good night and thank you. And I love the idea that you want to keep Zoom coming. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Okay. Good night
All right.
now.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you from Wisconsin.
Oh, wonderful. Hello, Susan.
Hi.
Thank you for inquiring. Sandy contacted me today and told me to put the time on the website. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Wanted to make sure we were in the right time zone. So we really enjoyed it.
Well,
And-
come to New Mexico and visit us.
We're on our way early February. We'll be there. So
Fantastic.
yeah. And
Okay.
we enjoyed many tours on the Mesa. Thank you much.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night now.
Good night.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.